King Charles's historic trip to France is cancelled in the face of violent nationwide protests. With French cities in turmoil, President Macron had no option but to cancel what would have been the King's first foreign trip as monarch.
I think it's maybe better if the King comes next time because of all, the trash, the garbages.
We are ashamed for our country to be in such a bad situation.
Also in news at 10 tonight. The US retaliates after a suspected Iranian drone strike kills a US contractor in Syria. Gwyneth Paltrow takes the stand to defend herself against claims she skied out of control into a man, leaving him with permanent brain damage.
I said, "You skied directly into my effing back," and he said, "Oh, sorry, I'm sorry."
Goodbye to all things Russian. How Putin's invasion has made Ukrainians want to reclaim their culture as well as their country. And the irrepressible Gilbert and George tell us about the new exhibition space they're opening up for free.
So we wanted to deal with death,
hope,
life,
fear,
sex,
money,
race,
religion, naked,
human,
well,
and be able to reach people.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. There is major disappointment on both sides of the channel tonight at the postponement of King Charles's planned 4-day state visit to France. For President Macron, who had to ask for the visit to be called off, it is, not to put it too fine a point on it, a deeply embarrassing moment. France has been riven by increasingly violent protests triggered by proposed reforms to the country's pension system. And the French president said it would be lacking sense for the royal couple to come. Charles and Camilla should have been arriving there on Sunday for what would have been the first state visit of his reign. Now, this highly symbolic moment, restating the historic entente cordiale between the two countries, will have to wait until probably the beginning of the summer.
This time last night, the streets of Paris were not what anyone would describe as a welcoming place for a visiting monarch. Not welcoming for any visitor, in fact. Across France, 1 million people had protested against their president. As Parisians surveyed the damage this morning, they were a little embarrassed that next week's big state visit by King Charles and the Queen Consort had been called off. He's not coming, this woman said.
Dommage pour notre pays.
Such a shame for our country.
I think it's maybe better if the King comes next time because of all, the trash, the garbages you have in Paris. It's safer, I think so.
We are ashamed for our country to be in such a bad situation. And I hope the King will be happy to come anyway.
President Macron himself described his decision to postpone the state visit as common sense. Given another day of protests against him had been organised right in the middle of the 3-day royal visit. So at the British Embassy in Paris, the flags with Charles III's new cipher will now have to come back down and be put into storage.
The King doesn't have any great say in this. Every step of a state visit is planned in minute detail by both sides. But ultimately, you're a guest. And if the host turns around and says the party's off, then there's not much you can do about it.
Remember, France had the honour of not just hosting the new monarch's first visit to France, but the first ever foreign trip of the King's new reign. All week, Buckingham Palace were tinkering with the programme, changing a tram ride here and a state banquet there. But this morning, President Macron telephoned the King to tell him with another day of protests planned, he had no choice but to call the whole thing off. The tipping point might well have been this sight from Bordeaux Town Hall last night, where the royal party were due on Tuesday at a reception in their honour.
State visits are a fantastic amount of work.
Lord Ricketts organised the last state visit to France when the late Queen travelled there in 2014. He says it became clear overnight that the King's visit next week had the potential to backfire.
A state visit is supposed to be a celebration, and if it goes ahead in conditions where the police have to throw great rings around the two principals, they can't go and meet the crowds, there's a worry about embarrassing incidents, it's better to put it off and do it at calmer times.
It means the only King Charles in Paris this weekend will be the waxwork one, which was unveiled today. You can decide how much of a likeness it is. The real King, meanwhile, with the Queen Consort, will still press ahead with their travel plans to Berlin later in the week. Germany will now host the first foreign visit of Britain's new monarch. Chris Ship, News at 10.
Well, Lucy is in Paris for us tonight. Lucy, what do you think are the chances that the situation on the streets around France could become calmer in the days ahead?
Well, Raggy, the trouble seems to come in waves. Most nights recently there have been relatively small skirmishes, but it's when large numbers of people come together that the violence tends to erupt, and it is for that exact reason, that potential risk, that this visit has ultimately been postponed, because on Tuesday a national day of strike action is planned when large numbers of people will come together for demonstrations countrywide, and Tuesday would have been the middle day of this royal visit. Now, there was a similar national day of action yesterday, and we witnessed firsthand just how quickly peaceful protests against these pension reforms turned very, very quickly into violent social unrest. And that is why the Elysee Palace came out today and said they simply could not guarantee a peaceful and orderly visit for the King and Queen Consort. But make no mistake, this is a huge blow for President Macron and France's world image, with a lot of embarrassment here. It is indeed the wisest and the best decision to avoid any diplomatic incident. But what it is also pointing to is an admission that there is a deepening political crisis here, and that the actions on the street are determining President Macron's actions.
Lucy in Paris, thanks so much. Now, tensions between the United States and Iran have continued to rise today, many notches, in fact, after the death of an American contractor in Syria. The contractor was killed by a drone suspected to be Iranian-made that hit a coalition base in northeastern Syria yesterday. 5 American service members and another contractor were also wounded. US forces retaliated with airstrikes on Syrian sites used by groups affiliated with Iran's Revolutionary Guard. In the past hour, President Biden said, "We don't seek conflict with Iran, but we've got to be prepared."
Today there has been a prolonged exchange of hostilities between the United States and Iranian-backed militias in Syria. This purports to show the aftermath of strikes involving American F-15 jets. Revenge for an Iranian-supplied drone hitting a US base, killing an American contractor and leaving 6 injured. President Biden ordering the retaliatory strike as he was flying to Canada for a state visit.
Make no mistake, the United States does not emphasize seek conflict with Iran, but be prepared for us to act forcefully, protect our people. That's exactly what happened last night.
Iran has stood shoulder to shoulder with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, supplying weapons and men to prop up his regime in the civil war. Increasingly, drones have played a crucial role. It's not just in Syria that the United States is facing a more aggressive Iran. Its drone technology is being exported to other conflicts around the world, including Ukraine. And in Washington this week, there was a warning of the alarming growth in Iranian military capability. One of America's most senior generals gave this chilling warning to politicians.
The Iran of 2023 is not the Iran of 1983. In fact, Iran today is exponentially more militarily capable than it was even 5 years ago. Today, Iran possesses the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East, with thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles. Iran also maintains the largest and most capable UAV force.
In Ukraine, they know from bitter experience how deadly Iranian drones can be. Experts think using this technology directly against the US shows how Iran has become emboldened.
There's a widening radius to the Iranian proliferation problem. There's Iranian drones in Venezuela, Iranian drones in Ethiopia, as we know, Iranian drones and copies of these drones across the battlefields of the Middle East, and now up in Russia for use against civilian infrastructure and those targets in Ukraine.
But for now, all eyes will be on northeast Syria to see how this volatile situation between the US and Iran may evolve. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Washington.
The Hollywood star Gwyneth Paltrow has entered the witness box tonight to testify against the retired optometrist suing her over a skiing accident. The actress denied that she engaged in risky behaviour on the slopes at the upmarket resort in Utah. Terry Sanderson claims her recklessness caused the collision in 2016, giving him brain damage and other lasting injuries.
3 days into this trial, though more than one lawyer joked this afternoon that it feels like longer, Gwyneth Paltrow took to the stand in her own defence.
Will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
She described the moment she says retired optometrist Terry Sanderson crashed into her on a ski slope in Utah in 2016.
Because I was hit by Mr. Sanderson and he was at fault, I assumed that Eric, who was our ski instructor, who was there at the time, who was overseeing the event, he said, I'm going to leave all of your information. And he said, you should go ski down because my kids were waiting for me.
She went on to describe the immediate aftermath of the crash and how she considered, though briefly, the possibility of a sexual assault.
All of a sudden, you see these two skis coming in between your legs. I would have freaked out too.
And I did.
Okay.
Well, when we fell down, I fell on his body, he fell on the ground, and so it was kind of like a spoon on the ground.
All right. So, and you're not saying to the jury that this was in any way, shape, or form a sexual assault?
I am not saying that. Okay. I'm just saying what went through my mind for a split second when it was happening.
All right, great.
Though she denies the recklessness Mr. Sanderson says has caused him ongoing health problems, she did admit today to language of a colour not perhaps in keeping with her public persona.
Yes.
And he said, I think you skied into me.
Yes.
And that's when you were furious and said, you skied directly into my effing back at the top of your lungs.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I apologize for my bad language.
Mr. Sanderson is seeking damages of more than $300,000. Miss Paltrow's children are expected on the stand later in the trial. Callum Watkinson, News at 10.
Shares in Germany's Deutsche Bank, one of Europe's biggest banks, fell sharply today as fears continued about the stability of the global banking system. At one point, shares in Deutsche Bank were down 14%, though they staged a slight recovery later in the day to close down 8.5%. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz was forced to give reassurances expressing confidence in the country's biggest lender, saying there is no reason to worry. The continuing jitters follows recent troubles that affected the big Swiss bank Credit Suisse. Now, the boss of Ofsted may today have rejected calls to put school inspections on hold in the wake of head teacher Ruth Perry taking her own life. But England's chief inspector of schools did seem to leave the door open to reforming the way schools are assessed and graded, saying the debate is legitimate. But many teachers are demanding sweeping changes to the way Ofsted rates schools, with some calling for a boycott of the whole inspection system.
To those who loved her, Ruth Perry's decision to take her own life can be directly linked to Ofsted and its decision to downgrade her school in Caversham, Reading, from outstanding to inadequate. Today, two of her friends and colleagues who run nearby primary schools have decided to speak out.
We want to make sure that we get the message out that Ofsted cannot do this to anyone else again.
They say this inspection regime goes too far.
You live in fear of the phone call. I lost half a stone in 2 days. I lost my voice. I felt traumatised.
We want to make sure that her death is not in vain. We absolutely want inspections. We know that they need to happen, but we need them to be much more compassionate.
England's Chief Inspector for Schools, Amanda Spielman, said the sad news about Ruth has led to an understandable outpouring of grief and anger. But she added, "I don't believe that stopping or preventing inspections would be in children's best interests." A key complaint about Ofsted is over the grading system that gives schools a single label, meaning that even if inspectors have plenty of praise, one issue can see them branded inadequate. Today, Amanda Spielman defended the grading system, arguing that it gives parents a simple and accessible summary. But she did say that the broader debate around removing grades was a legitimate one. However, the Prime Minister's spokesman said Rishi Sunak had confidence in the current system. The National Education Union strongly disagrees, saying the Ofsted regime has meant serious mental health issues for teachers and heads.
It's not fit for purpose. It should be replaced with an inspection system that is collaborative, that is supportive for head teachers and actually does what it should do, of encourage and support schools to improve the educational chances of children and young people.
And today, a former Chief Inspector of Schools said he believed it was time for a change in direction.
Inspectors and Ofsted operate with consent, and obviously people feel that what's happening at the moment is very unfair, where one bad judgment on a particular issue can completely obscure the good work that goes on in other aspects of the school and destroy a head teacher's reputation and the reputation of the school.
One thing is unquestionable. Ruth Perry's death has shone a bright light on this debate, with ministers under intense pressure. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
The Prime Minister of Albania told us in an interview today he thought the government's plan for dealing with the small boats smuggling people across the channel could work, but only if new legal routes are opened for economic migrants. Speaking after yesterday's Downing Street meeting with Rishi Sunak, Edi Rama offered his help. Many of those in the small boats are currently Albanian, but he also said it should be made easier for Albanians to come here by official channels. The UK, he said, remains a land of opportunity. Whether the government takes him up on his offer, however, remains to be seen.
Migration isn't just top of the UK's agenda. It is also a divisive issue in many countries where migrants start their journey. But the Home Secretary angered one of those nations when she said this.
If Labour were in charge, they would be allowing all the Albanian criminals to come to this country.
Today, the Albanian Prime Minister told me her comments were a disgrace.
Very unfair attitude towards the fantastic Albanian community here in Britain, which is absolutely not about some rotten apples. It's about people that are contributing to the British economy big time.
More than 11,000 Albanians arrived on small boats between May and September last year. That was 42% of all the people crossing the Channel. Around 800 illegal migrants have been returned there since December. That's when the UK and Albanian governments signed an agreement to tackle illegal immigration.
If the British side will be serious, I'm very confident that we'll see incredibly good results. It's not just about cracking down the criminal networks and discouraging the channel movements, but it's also about having a much more comprehensive approach towards regular entry in the United Kingdom.
Britain has its problems, at the moment the cost of living, inflation, strikes. Do you think that Britain will, though, continue to be an attractive place for Albanians?
It will remain a land of opportunities. In the end, it's all about jobs.
A think tank that campaigns for lower immigration doesn't expect the government to relax the rules.
Given that over 1 million people immigrated to the UK last year and net immigration was over 500,000, it's hard to imagine that the government can come up with any more routes for them to come by without some form of free movement, which would of course give Albania an incredibly privileged status.
As he travels home tonight, some Albanians will be planning to head in the opposite direction. The success of this trip will be judged on how many continue to do so illegally. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
Now, it's the final weekend in the race between the three candidates vying to succeed Nicola Sturgeon as leader of the SNP and Scotland's First Minister. Ash Regan, Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes are standing in a contest which has been shrouded in drama and controversy. The outcome is being eagerly watched by other parties, particularly Labour, which once counted Scotland as a stronghold.
A final flurry of campaigning after what has been a bitter contest. Not helped today by a banner suggesting the leadership race has been rigged by the SNP to favour Humza Yousaf. Kate Forbes' campaign team deny this was one of theirs, but she certainly has experienced bad blood. Colleagues in her own party openly criticised her for saying she's against same-sex marriage and abortions on religious grounds.
I am so relaxed about working with my colleagues. Many of them are my friends. To work with you? I think they will, because I think they're Democrats, and I think they will honour the choice that SNP members have made in this contest. I certainly will.
If you win, is the next general election still a de facto referendum?
No, it's not.
The favourite to win, Humza Yousaf, does not favour Nicola Sturgeon's de facto referendum plan either, but said he would deliver independence within 5 years.
We have to make sure we are making the case for a consistent majority so independence essentially becomes a settled will. That will then mean that all those political obstacles that are put in the way will disappear.
How will they disappear?
Well, in the same way that we created the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament and the desire for a Scottish Parliament became the settled will.
The Labour Party won a general election on the premise that they were offering.
And the reason they promised it, of course, was because it was clear that the settled will was for devolution, was for the Scottish Parliament. It could no longer be ignored.
The outsider candidate Ash Regan says her rivals are wishy-washy on independence.
If I'm leader and First Minister, I will be running the next election as an opportunity for the people of Scotland to choose if they want Scotland to become independent.
Hoping to capitalise on the SNP's state of flux, Labour leader Keir Starmer was back in Scotland today, his third trip in as many weeks. His party is targeting areas like Rutherglen, a seat Labour lost to the SNP.
Labour are hoping that Nicola Sturgeon's departure opens the door to them being able to win again in areas like this and retaking Scotland. The SNP are hoping that a new leader breathes new life into the party.
I've been SNP now for about 6-7 years.
How are you feeling now that Nicola Sturgeon's gone?
I'd go back Labour.
All my family, mummy and daddy and granny, everybody was Labour.
Did you then switch to the SNP?
I did.
Can you see yourself staying with the SNP or going back to Labour now?
No, that's debatable.
SNP, and I'll stick with SNP.
You're staying SNP,
yes.
Even after Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, I don't know. I need to think about it, see who gets
and you need
first.
to get this bus as well.
Yeah, thank you.
From Monday, Scotland will have a new First Minister. Their first job will be uniting their own party. Then they must convince Scots there is life in the SNP after Nicola Sturgeon. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
The widespread anger and revulsion in Ukraine at the brutality of Vladimir Putin's invasion has helped fuel the heroic resistance to Russia's military onslaught. Now, another kind of popular resistance is picking up momentum: the outright rejection of all forms of Russian culture. Classic Russian ballets like Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake are being shunned. Russian books are being taken off the shelves. Not because of any official edict, though. Ukrainians themselves are making it crystal clear what they think of Moscow's claims on their country.
Even in the darkest days of the war, the cultural life of Ukraine remains alive and resilient. Theatre, music, ballet, here Giselle being danced at the National Opera House. But something is changing here. A culture once so entwined with that of its neighbour is now rejecting all things Russian. In the rehearsal rooms of the National Ballet Company, you'll not hear the works of Stravinsky or Prokofiev, nor even the great ballets of Tchaikovsky. Russian composers are out. The dancers don't want to dance them, nor the audiences to watch.
It may seem extraordinary that any ballet company, particularly one with the historic ties to Russian ballet that this has, would ever want to renounce the great Russian ballet composers. But that is where this war has brought Ukraine.
For the performers, it's devastating. The careers of principal dancers like Vladislav Chachuk and Tetiana Lotseva have been spent perfecting roles in Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, The Nutcracker. Now they're having to build a new repertoire.
You must have danced world's greatest ballet so many times. What will it mean not to dance then?
I understand that it is very difficult for me not to dance the pieces I used to dance before, but it can't be any other way. Maybe I will, sometime again in the future. We can't perform Russian works now.
Ballet is losing the most of all. For choreographers like Viktor Ishchuk, 50% of his repertoire will no longer be danced. But even if he didn't like it, there'd be no choice.
This decision came from the people. This was from the people outside, not from the theatre, not from the government.
So you don't think people would come to watch a Russian ballet?
Yes, I'm sure. They just not come.
In the foyer, a survey of those arriving to see a French ballet endorsed that view.
Would you come and see a Russian ballet here?
No, Russia, no, because they are murder and terrorists.
Would you like to see Swan Lake or Nutcracker or the great Russian ballet?
I think that this is great ballet, yes, of course, but I think it's not time for this ballet in our country.
Don't watch to Russian ballet, only Ukraine now.
It doesn't stop at the Opera House. Ordinary Ukrainians are purging their bookshelves of anything written in Russian, by Russians, even just about Russia. Collected at a bookshop in central Kiev for recycling. No one's ordering these books to be banned or burned. Ukrainian people are just wanting Russia out of their lives. Children's books too. The days of young Ukrainians being brought up bilingual are largely over. No country fighting for its very existence can separate culture from politics. Great Russian artists may not have started this war, but here at least their works can be added to the list of its victims. James Mace, News at 10, Kiev.
Finally, there's nothing unusual about artists being unusual people, but even by those standards, Gilbert and George stand out. After a lifetime devoted to creating beguiling and unsettling works of art, the pair have poured out their own money into a new exhibition space in East London, where admission will be free.
Nestled inconspicuously on a quiet side street sits an old industrial building that's been transformed into a home for creative duo Gilbert and George, collaborators who saw the rules of art as infinitely bendable.
We come out of a generation of artists and art teachers who believed in form and formalism, shape and angle, rectangles, squares, circles, and we wanted an art that could address life and the viewer. So we wanted to deal with death,
hope,
life,
fear,
sex,
money,
race,
religion, naked,
human,
world,
and be able to reach people.
Gilbert and George are partnered professionally and in life. They met at art college in the 60s and have been inseparable ever since. Known for performing as living sculptures, their first creative inspiration came from the hardship they saw around them.
We believe that we found the truth and the essence of an art form when we were baby artists and we bought a gramophone record called Underneath the Arches. And we took it home because all of the people near us were living underneath the arches. People damaged by the First World War, the Second World War, people damaged by the sex laws, pre-decriminalization. And we played the record and we were amazed by the truth and beauty of the words. And they were, the Ritz I never sigh for, the Carlton they can keep. There's only one place that I know, and that is where I sleep. Underneath the arches, I dream my dreams away.
As many focus their spending on necessities, the pair have opened a free gallery in East London, so all those with an interest in art have access to it.
I think it's very important they are able to express themselves. They like it or dislike it, but they are part of it. They have to be part of art, and that is extraordinary. It's an amazing language.
Do you have any advice for an artist who one day hopes to have a space like this?
When you wake up tomorrow morning, sit on the edge of the bed and don't stand up, don't open your eyes until you've decided, what do I want to say to the world today? When you've decided, then you can do it. And the second piece of advice to the baby artist is,
don't listen to the teachers.
So teachers may not hold the answers, but up-and-coming artists can learn plenty from Gilbert and George. Rishi Davda, News at 10.
And that is all so far. Thank you for watching. Good night and have a great weekend.